All right. Well, welcome to our February Artificial Intelligence for Clinicians AI4C lecture series presented by Mass General Brigham AI. And we are delighted to have Dr. Pranav Rajpurkar here, who's going to talk about the Generalist Medical AI will see you now. As you know, this is a series that happens monthly on the second Thursday of the month. From September to May, we give you the summer off. And this is sort of our winter series here. And you can see some of the names that we have. I do want to point out that we're going to have a special May one, off cycle, not the second Thursday, but the first of May, where we'll have Tessa Cook from the University of Pennsylvania present her talk. But you can see we had Safwan Halaby from Northwestern. We have Ian Pan, our wonderful data scientist, radiology resident at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Harry Trivedi from Emory University School of Medicine. As many of you know, these are recorded, and you can view our past recordings at that link, which Carrie Ann will put in the chat. And also, please fill out the survey. There'll be a link in the chat for that. This can help us to bring you things that are of interest to you, give us some feedback on how we're doing. As you know, we can be found on the internet, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on. And we advertise our educational activities and our lecture series there. So let me introduce our wonderful speaker for today, Dr. Pranav Rajpurkar. He got his bachelor's in science, master's of science, and PhD degrees all in computer science from Stanford University. Then he came east to Harvard Medical School, where he's in the Department of Biomedical Informatics. He's an assistant professor there. He's also co-founder of A to Z Radiology AI. And the mission of A to Z Radiology AI is to create AI-powered safety net for radiologists. And the first product that has come out of that is interpreting abdominal pelvis CTs. Dr. Rajpurkar's research focuses on developing AI systems that can interpret medical data, reason through complex problems, and communicate it at an expert level, with the goal of creating AI doctors that can work independently or alongside human physicians. His lab approaches biomedical problems with a computational lens, developing AI algorithms, data sets, and interfaces that cut across computer vision, natural language processing, and structured health data. He's collaborated with many, many people, not just internal to Harvard Medical School, but across the country and the world, in clinicians who are in multiple medical specialties, including radiology, cardiology, and pathology. And he's made some of the first demonstrations of expert level deep learning algorithms, and then he studies their effects on clinician decision making. He's published over 100 academic articles that have garnered more than 32,000 citations from prestigious journals. And for those who aren't familiar, that's a humongous number. He's been recognized for with numerous awards, including Forbes 30 Under 30 in Science in 2022, MIT's Tech Review's Innovator Under 35 in 2023, and he's a Google Research Scholar. Today, he's going to share with us his thoughts, and the title of his talk is The Generalist Medical AI Will See You Now. So, Pranav, go ahead. I'm going to stop sharing, and you can share your screen.
I will share my screen here. That works. First of all, thank you, Dr. Andrew, for the very kind introduction and for allowing me the opportunity to talk about some of the topics that excite me and, in my opinion, are transforming the field like never before. So what I want to do today is share one of the most exciting questions in our field right now and use that as a jumping point to talk about some of the ways that we've been thinking about this, both in an academic mostly, and a slight bit of the way we're thinking about this in a commercial setting. So for the past 5 or 6 years, we've had this vision that we're going to have AI and we're going to place it in workflows with doctors, and we're going to have the combination of two work better than either alone. And for some time, this was not true because the AI wasn't good enough. And so you combine a good thing with a bad thing, and it doesn't turn out to be that good. But now we're starting to see something else. And I want to share some of the early evidence that we're seeing that's causing us to question this assumption. So this is a study that we published in collaboration with some economists at MIT, which tested at a large scale this idea that AI tools will enhance physician performance by providing helpful diagnostic support. And the setup was 227 radiologists that were responsible for interpreting 15 conditions on chest x-rays. They were given AI assistance for the arm where we have AI assistance, and then clinical context when available. And so clinical context here includes the indications, the vitals, the abnormal labs when they're available. And on the left, you can see the example of the AI output when we're in the AI arm being provided in addition to the chest X-ray image. The surprising finding was that we had this AI model that could outperform 78% of the radiologists. And there were different metrics we looked at this from, and in all metrics, this seemed to be consistent. And we gave this AI to these radiologists and found that providing AI assistance did not, on average, improve the diagnostic performance of the radiologists. Well, that's interesting, suspicious. Why is that? The key factor that was influencing the success of the collaboration was the confidence of the AI, not the capability. So, for example, the integration worked when the AI was very confident. But when the AI had uncertainty in the predictions, it actually led to a worse off outcome than not having the AI assistance at all. There's this myth in AI integration right now that some people are going to benefit more than others. And the people who are going to benefit are maybe the ones who are more used to technology. Typically, people associate this with being younger in training. People associate this with being a specialist in whatever specialty is of interest or having previous experience with AI tools. So we said, let's test this in this study with 140 radiologists that we eventually published in Nature Medicine. We asked the question, are any of these factors influencing the success of the human AI collaboration? And turns out, no. The experience level does not predict the success with AI integration. We had these 140 radiologists represent multiple specialties, multiple experience levels. And what we found was that the years of experience, the specialty in thoracic radiology here, or the experience with AI tools did not produce a difference in who benefited and who did not. So what this implies is that one size fits all deployments fail, and that we need to think about catering to individuals without thinking of coarse ways of defining those groups like years of experience or specialty or the experience with AI tools. This is not an isolated finding. In literature, there's a broader pattern emerging of failed AI collaboration. And this is not just in radiology, this is being seen across different medical specialties. A study led by some of my colleagues at Harvard, Stanford, Virginia, tested the performance of physicians when given AI assistance with GPT-4 in order to do complex management cases. A version of this work has now been published in Nature Medicine as of last week with similar findings, where the combination of the physician and AI was slightly better than the physicians alone, but it was far better to just have the AI alone perform this task. Now, it turns out that there are caveats here in that the AI alone was using a different prompt than the physicians were. and there wasn't enough training given to the physicians to be able to optimally use this AI model. But it does point to a trend that's now also been seen in other studies, including in chest X-ray, in mammography, and in management reasoning. I want to highlight some emerging evidence for new forms of collaboration. So just last week, the Lancet Digital Health published the long-awaited Masai trials final results, which has the model of saying, let's do risk-based AI triage in mammography. So here, with 100,000 women, the randomized control trial was used to evaluate whether AI can determine whether a scan should get a single read or a double read. And so in this setup, with risk scores that were small, the case got assigned to single reading. Otherwise, a small fraction of cases got assigned to double reading. And what was shown was that in this setup where the AI-driven triage is happening to single reader or double reader, there was a 29% increase in cancer detection. And at the same time, we had a reduction in radiologist workload by 44% with no increase in false positive. So this is very promising. Notably, in this trial, it was shown that early detection of small node-negative cancers was improved. And the detection rate went from 5% on the standard double reading to 6.4 in this AI triage reading. The reason I call this a different model for collaboration is that this is not a setup in which AI is shadowing every single physician and providing its opinion to the physician to handle. This is a setup in which the AI is deciding, does a case need a single reader or a double reader? There's another recent study, also in Mammo AI, that provides us more evidence for rethinking this approach. So this is a study that got published in Nature Medicine in January of this year, which was looking at the real-world effectiveness of AI integration across 12 German screening sites. And the goal here wasn't randomization of AI. It was to see how radiologists naturally adapt to and integrate AI in their workflow. And the key finding was that when given the flexibility in the AI interpretation, radiologists developed this separation in their workflow where they used AI-supported viewing for the routine cases, while on more complex ones, they preferred not to toggle on the AI at all. And with this natural design, it was shown that there was a 17.6% higher cancer detection rate compared to standard reading. The implication here is radiologists intuitively recognizing when to leverage AI strengths and when to maintain direct control. So what does this mean for us? My colleague Eric Topol and I, a couple of weeks ago at this point, wrote an article in the New York Times, which wasn't originally titled "The Robot Doctor Will See You Now," but asked the question, despite the strong AI performance, the fact that combining physician judgment with AI not leading to higher accuracy is a problem. And maybe we are forcing a collaboration rather than enhancing the synergy between AI and clinicians in some other way. So should we think about solving this forced collaboration problem by trying to leverage clear and complementary roles? That was the argument. So what does this look like? The motivation here is if we provide AI outputs, there is cognitive friction that's happening. This automation neglect is what we call it, suggests that we need to think about a different approach. And maybe we should be thinking about how to separate the roles of AI and doctors by leveraging each component's strength individually in a diagnostic workflow. The key principles of how do we create the division of labor, how do we create separate yet complementary responsibilities, and how do we optimize the workflow based on unique capabilities of each has really not been explored in literature. So what I want to propose here are three models of this role separation. The first, in which we have AI be responsible for the first step, which is here going to be about initial review and documentation. And then we're going to hand off that case to the expert for actually doing the interpretation. Note that this is different from our usual assisted setup because we're not saying the AI is doing the same task as the expert. We're saying they're doing a different task for the same patient as part of the same case. The doctor first sequential flips the order. It's saying we're going to have the primary interpretation be done by the doc, and then we're going to bring in the AI for enhancement and education. And I want to share an example of what this looks like concretely. And then we're going to talk about the case allocation setup, in which we have a pool of cases, and we're going to assign some of them to be read by AI, and we're going to assign some of them to be read by doctors. And how we do this is something that I'll touch on briefly. Okay, so I want to share an example of the first of these models in which we have the sequence such that the AI is responsible for the first step and the physician for the second. This is work that was published last month from our group in Nature Medicine, where we propose a way of evaluating large language models in interacting with patients. And so what's the key idea? The key idea I want to narrate over this video. Typically, when we think about evaluating these large language models that we're thinking about for clinical settings, the way we evaluate them right now is to have them look at case vignettes like this one, where there's some text, there's images associated with that text, and then there are multiple choice options. And in this case, the clinical LLM gets all of that information, and then within a few seconds would output something like leukemia, which is the right answer for this particular case. So we said that's not a very realistic way of evaluating these LLMs because we didn't look at history gathering capabilities. We didn't look at diagnosing from layman language, and we gave it options. And never in medicine have I ever presented my PCP with options of what I have. So let's think about changing this a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to create an AI agent that's going to be responsible for sharing one piece of information at a time based on what the clinical LLM is asking. So here, the clinical LLM asks questions, and then the agent uses the information that's available to answer those questions. And so here you can see that the continuation of the clinical LLM, which we're evaluating to ask these questions. And at the end of asking all these questions, it should come up with the answer of leukemia. Instead, this LLM begins to think that this growing pain should be controlled with ibuprofen. That is an issue. And so the question is, with this sort of a framework in which we're evaluating clinical LLMs to do the history gathering, it's really not working as well as expected. And we have now a public leaderboard called CraftMD, which is going to help us answer the question of how ready these models are to be used as part of clinical settings. The key finding that we saw as part of CraftMD was that if you take a strong model like GPT-4 and give it these vignettes, it does really well, 82% accuracy. But as soon as you bring it into a conversational setup, that accuracy drops a lot from 82 to 63%. And this idea of struggling with natural dialogue and the gap between the structured task and real conversations is going to be one of the things that stops us from truly realizing the potential of these clinical LLMs. So the AI first sequential, I shared an approach, and I also shared some evidence saying we're not ready for this approach given the current data and the scenario which we looked at. I want to share an example from our group of now the second of these role separation strategies, which is to have the doctor first sequential aspect. And the work that I'm going to be using as an example of this is the Rexplain work from our group, which thinks about how we translate radiology reports into patient-friendly formats. And so I want to share with you an example of how a radiology report is going to be communicated with patients in the modern day.
This examination found a hazy, inflamed spot in the left lower part of your lung. This suggests that there could be an infection, possibly related to COVID-19, causing these changes in that area. At the rendering window, there's an orange-colored spot representing this finding. In your CT image, the affected area looks cloudier and denser than the rest of the lung tissue, forming a faint cloudy patch in the outer region of the left lung. In a healthy CT image, you would not see these hazy patches. Instead, you would see mostly dark spaces representing air with a few thin white lines and dots representing normal blood vessels.
It took us many months to understand how to iterate on this such that we could deliver value to patients in terms of understanding their own reports and at the same time getting to a point at which radiologists would feel comfortable with sending patients these reports in addition to their radiology reports. We did a survey with radiologists to understand how they like these generated videos. And the most interesting part of this for me is this answer right here to the question, I'm comfortable providing this video to a patient to help them understand their findings, where 48% of the radiologists said, I strongly agree, and 32% said, I agree. And so this number is at around 70%, which was initially at 15% when we started out this project. And so it's something that we've continued to iterate on towards a world in which we can directly provide these to patients as part of existing workflows. So we've now covered two models of role separation, the sequential ones in particular, in which we're swapping the order of the AI of the doctor. I want to talk third about the case allocation strategy, in which for our case pool, we're dynamically allocating it to AI or doctors. In our work published in the NBER journal, we demonstrated that with our data of 227 radiologists using AI, we could define an optimal delegation strategy that looks something like the following. When a case comes in, let an AI first run the inference on it. If the AI is confident, then just have it report on that particular case. If the AI is unconfident, then present that case to the radiologist. If the radiologist is confident, then use the radiologist read. And if the radiologist is unconfident, only then show the AI output to the radiologist. We showed that this made most sense in terms of optimizing for accuracy and also optimizing for cost with the data that we collected. It's an interesting setup in which we're saying that AI-only cases are presented only to the AI in the system, while the humans get assigned the cases depending on the confidence level of the AI. So this is an interesting delegation strategy for which we only have really early evidence and for which I expect we will see far more randomized control trials trying to explore the optimal delegation strategies. I think all of what I presented so far might turn out to be completely wrong and overturned in the next few years. And the reason for that is the rise of a new class of models with a new class of capabilities called generalist AI models. And the big distinction between narrow AI models and generalist AI models is that narrow AI models have been really the standard of these past many years. And they've been focused on tackling a narrow clinical question, like detecting pneumonia from chest X-rays or detecting fractures from bone X-rays or detecting nodules from CT scans. But this represents a very different task to the ones radiologists do in practice, which is detect, characterize, and if necessary, measure all findings that are going to be clinically relevant and possibly clinically irrelevant, but worthy to note on the images. And so in this quest to comprehensive reporting in terms of being context driven, sometimes making predictions and judgments about risk and about treatments, come these new class of models. And we wrote about this in a work published in Nature in April 2023, coining this generalist medical artificial intelligence. And so what I want to share with you today is our group's latest attempt at building a generalist AI system that's centered around medical imaging called MedVersa. And MedVersa had the following motivation, which is, could you have one model that was responsible for looking at different kinds of medical images that were not just in radiology, take in not only the imaging data, but also the textual data that often accompanies these images, and be able to perform a range of tasks, including captioning those images, so generating reports or classifying different kinds of pathologies, or even segmenting different kinds of organs, all with one model. The reason this was so crazy of an idea at the time at which we started was that the predominant thought in this space was that, of course, separate models would outperform one model that was trying to do everything well. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is it's possible to just tune something really well for one task, and it becomes harder to tune something for these whole lot of tasks. And the second idea that was common at the time was the idea that when you get good at one thing, you become worse at another, especially if they're unrelated tasks. Now, it turns out once things start scaling, that all of that is untrue. And our effort here was to aggregate one of the largest collections of medical images across modalities and correspondingly also the labels associated with those images at unprecedented scale. And what we found was that with this unified training process, we actually set state-of-the-art performance on several of the tasks which we attempted, including tasks that had to do with generating a report from an image or classifying lesions on skin images or being able to segment major organs on some of these medical image tasks. And so I want to share with you a video of MedVersa in action to illustrate the capability of such a model. So here we start off by asking the model to characterize the findings on an image. Note that we have given it the indication available to us, and the model spits out this particular findings paragraph. Now, this happens to be correct for this image, and we're going to look at another case. In this case, we have context of a 70 to 80-year-old female who has respiratory distress. We say characterize the findings. Of the things the model outputs, there's moderate pulmonary edema. We could have also directly just asked it, how severe is the pulmonary edema? And if the model is good and consistent, it should say moderate, which it does. But now let's try to see if we can ask the model to do tasks of a different nature, which in this case is going to be annotating on top of the image. So we say outline the heart. And for those of you who know where the heart is, it's not quite a right outline, but as I like to say, its heart's in the right place. On the next prompt here, we're going to look at a different kind of a medical image. Here, a photo of the skin, and in this particular case, the model has made the correct diagnosis of melanoma. Here, take a look at a CT scan, ask the model to segment the liver. And if we wanted to segment out another organ, it's a matter of changing one word in the prompt to have it now segment out the pancreas instead of the liver. So that's the power of such a generalist model, that if you want to solve a new task, it's as easy as specifying a new prompt. Now, it turns out that evaluating such a model gets pretty hard. And that's because once a model starts generating outputs in language, the question is, how do you evaluate language? And the way we set up this experiment is similar to how human experiments are set up in medical education, which is we're going to see, or in peer review, which is we're going to provide two reports. One of them has been generated by the model. One of them has been generated by a human, a radiologist. And we're going to present both reports to another radiologist who's going to be blinded to the source of the two reports. One of them, of course, has been generated by the model. And what the radiologist has to do is to determine whether, report A is better, report B is better, or whether both reports are clinically equivalent. And we're doing this for chest x-rays. And what we found was that overall, 71% of AI reports matched or exceeded the human-generated reports in the blinded assessment. If we looked at complex cases, there was 58% equivalence or superiority, but in routine normal cases, 95% of the AI reports were equivalent or superior in normal studies. So this is interesting evidence, and one that I expect we'll see evolve as our technologies get even stronger over the upcoming 2 years. One of the ways in which workflows will change is the idea of having AI-assisted drafting, in which the AI is used to create an initial draft of the report, which is then modified by the radiologist to get to their final endpoint. So what we did in this trial was to say, let's see how much time savings and accuracy improvement happens when we start with these AI-generated drafts, where we'll have two different types of AI. One is our MedVersa model, and the other is a GPT-4 model. And then we're going to compare that to the normal negative template starting point. And so what we found was very interesting, which is we're looking at the time savings for reading 100 chest x-ray studies. And what we found was, one, there was high variability in terms of how much people benefited from having these drafts, with improvement ranging anywhere from 5 to 40 minutes. What was interesting, if you look at the comparison of the GPT-4o, which is the lighter line with the MedVersa line here, is that GPT-4o actually produced a increase in the time taken for the radiologist. And that makes sense if you think about a worse AI model is going to actually make things more confusing for the reader rather than having them start from scratch. And that's well reflected in the data. Even looking at the top 10% of readers here only benefited marginally from the use of GPT-4o as a drafter. In comparison with MedVersa, we saw a much higher time savings, and most importantly, things were on the positive side of 0, which means time savings, where the time saving range was still variable depending on the reader. But it's not just a question of time, it's also a question of quality. And our graph on the right basically shows a 20 to 25% reduction in discrepancies with starting with the MedVersa draft compared to normal templates and GPT-4, which produced a similar level of discrepancy relative to each other. you can see that when we subgroup by report writing time, we actually see that the discrepancy is far more reduced on the high report writing time as opposed to the low report writing time. I think this is a very exciting area, and the idea of generating radiology reports from images is one that has to be looked at very closely and very transparently. And so, in order to encourage and foster this transparency, we have created a leaderboard for this task, which is called RexRank. And RexRank has evaluations of several models that are trained by both academic and commercial groups and represent our current understanding of what represents state of the art. MedVersa is one of the top performing models on the leaderboard. We have evaluations not only on public data sets, but also on one of the largest private data sets, which has been used to compare these models. One of the challenges that I often think about when thinking about these generalist radiology AI tools is how will they get paid for? And one of the underappreciated complexities of the US healthcare systems is the payment mechanisms, specifically as they relate to reimbursement. And so one of the things that my colleagues recently wrote about in NPJ Digital Medicine is what are gaps in the current reimbursement landscape for AI. In the Medicare payment structure, physician services have reimbursement associated with work RVUs, practice expenses, and malpractice coverage, and hospital services are reimbursed based on whether they're inpatient, whether they're NTAP mechanisms, or outpatient services. And that's just to illustrate the complexity of the system here. CPT codes are at the heart of some of the reimbursement mechanisms, and we have two established Category 1 CPT codes, or at least we did at the time of us writing this last year, one for diabetic retinopathy screening and one for bone density assessment, which has reimbursement associated with the use of these tools in practice. These reimbursement tools require FDA clearance or approval, and require evidence showing improvement over standard of care and also widespread adoption. And when something doesn't fulfill all these three categories, it becomes a Category 3 code. And so for these, we have a longer list of emerging codes. One of the key challenges here with our current setup is that current codes are designed for narrow AI tools performing single tasks, and they don't really account for generalist AI systems that can handle these multiple tasks simultaneously. So the evolution of AI reimbursement has to happen, and having each task require a separate CPT code, having no codes for multi-disease detection, and limitations to narrow single-use tools are adding on to existing payment structure issues around not having coverage for AI subscription fees, unclear RVU adjustments for whether or not physician uses AI, as well as how do we pay for AI maintenance? Is the reimbursement associated for that? There are pathways here that are emerging, including the launch of the TSET pathway and new models, including our proposed value-based AI payments, subscription reimbursements, and we'll see how this front evolves over the next year or two. But as an example, a generalist radiology AI system that even analyzes chest X-rays for multiple findings can currently only bill for one. And so new pathways will ideally have to enable this comprehensive service billing and better reflect the system's true value. So just to give you a glimpse of some of the efforts that we're making commercially, so I'm co-founder of a company called A-to-Z Radiology AI. And one of the ideas and missions for us is how we can have AI really take on the full scope of the diagnostic workflow and go beyond these point solutions that we're used to. I want to play you a video of one of the early prototypes that we've designed here. So in this case, what we're able to do on this abdomen pelvis CT is generate the lines on the right, where each one of those findings is grounded in a region of the scan, and each can easily be reviewed by a radiologist, and they simply review each case and say whether they agree or disagree with every one of these findings. You can imagine just how much of a time savings this provides to radiologists compared to starting from scratch, and gets us closer to the idea of having this edit and sign off workflow rather than a starting from scratch workflow. We talked about 3 models for role separation today, and I think as we gather further evidence in this new world of generalist medical AI, I expect these models will evolve even further. They might entirely be replaced by other new models, and that's what's so exciting about this field. One thing's clear, that if we're thinking about AI systems becoming more and more comprehensive, more context-driven, we need to think about new ways of evaluating them. One of the things that we've recently proposed in our Lancet perspective is to have a clinical certification pathway for AI, in which we first establish the baseline competency through the standardized testing and scenario analysis, which is where we are, I would argue, for the major part today, and then have them be evaluated on their specialty task performance in an assistive setting, with first an offline run, but then an assistive shadow mode. And as we have more and more confidence in the AI system, we should think about how to remove some of those guardrails to have it do more autonomous operation with continuous recertification cycles, and imagining what that looks like across specialties. I'll end here. I have a very smart and talented team to thank for their collaboration. And the work that I shared today, I've included some of the references on the slide here. One of the interesting things that we offer in our lab is an opportunity for people to get together in interdisciplinary teams to work on solving these problems. So our medical AI bootcamp program is open to AI students from Harvard and Stanford, and it's open to medical doctors from all around the world. It's a program by application, and we have a cycle of review every month. And it's been one of the main ways in which I've been able to create these very exciting collaboration setups between people who bring a variety of perspectives into tackling some of our biggest problems. So thank you, Dr. Andriel, for inviting me today, and I look forward to, if we have time for discussion, engaging in that.
Well, fantastic, fantastic presentation. You covered a lot of ground there, and getting thank yous in the chat. Folks who have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll have Dr. Rajpurkar address those. Wow, the role separation, you sort of debunked the thought that the less experienced radiologist is going to benefit from using this. And do you think some of that was maybe we've done, we had such an increase in the excitement around these models that, again, are narrow AI models that really don't do the job of what a radiologist does. And I think people have been pretty disappointed with, the impact of these models. Do you think that had anything to do with folks using these models and not finding benefit from them?
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. I think one of the things that has been clear is that there is an anchoring effect which is if I use something and I make up my mind about it in the first 2 minutes, it's going to take me maybe weeks to have an updated opinion on that. And I think that's natural human behavior. And one of the things that people are realizing is that no, wait, this next generation of models is different and it is helpful and it is not the right anchor as what I had to the previous set of technologies which I experienced. And I think it's one of the challenges and a double-edged sword in our field is that for things to be used clinically, they have to be regulatory approved. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
What it does create is it does create a delay between a technology being developed and a technology being approved.
Mhm.
And so in some ways, I think the nonlinear extrapolation that we've seen in our other work, like for example, writing, is yet to make its way into the regulated sphere. So,
Mhm.
for example, when I write now, whether that's a grant or a paper, I rely heavily on the latest tools. And the tools I use today are much better than the tools I was using 6 months ago. And I expect 2 years from now, we'll see that same transition happen within the space of medical devices.
Yeah. I mean, today, what we really have in terms of evaluating some of these generalist models and these large language models is really kind of how we evaluate physicians, peer review, if you will. And that's all we have, although people are using a lot of these models internally. So that clearly has to change. And I think even with the narrow models, Europe got it right in that you can have multiple findings approved for a particular application when we would get that very same company here in the States and only one is approved at a time, so ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. We have a bunch of questions. I have just one other question. What does it take to make these models? Are you using base and doing, transfer learning, fine tuning? Do you find it helps to have medical input? That was the thought that, okay, we can't just have internet stuff. We have to have medical input to it. What are your thoughts around what does it take to make these models? And then we'll get to some other questions.
Yeah, I think there's a easy answer and a more, I think, nuanced answer.
Mhm.
And the easy answer, in my opinion, is focus on the data, and the rest will work itself out.
Mhm.
And then the more nuanced answer to the question is I think that a lot of machine learning engineering is about an obsession to solve a particular problem, no matter what needs to be thrown at it.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's the difference between one line of code in 1,000 being there versus not. And I think the people that build machine learning models understand this and understand the vast difference that one single design choice can create. And I think that's just the nature of the work right now is it is a mix of attention to detail and an obsession to solve a particular problem with whatever experimental or sort of gestalt-based approach one thinks is appropriate at the moment.
Right. And I think we may have gotten it wrong, even with the narrow models. We were trying to build the most generalizable model we could, when in fact, maybe we should have just tried to get something good enough and then fine tune it per site. But let's get to questions. So lots of thank yous. Dr. Michael Lev, can you comment on the ground truth for generalist AI? How do we achieve accurate or better than human radiologist performance?
Um, I think that achieving human level performance is very achievable with the right scale of data and the quality of data. And one of the things we've observed, even in the narrow AI models, is that every human has an error pattern. And as long as that error pattern isn't systemic across different humans, that the model can learn to essentially uh, correct on the errors. And so you can end up in a system which is superior to each individual labeler that was used to train it, as long as the labelers have different error modes, which is almost always the case within medicine. And so I think how do you get to superhuman level is sort of clear from that aspect. I think there are also setups in which you can learn from the outcome itself, where, for example, the pathology ground truth serves as your both your reference standard, but as your target label as well. This has been typically hard to do at scale. I think it's been best done in Mammo, but that's been another pathway to superhuman performance.
Great. And then a follow-up from Dr. Lev. If the Generalist AI succeeds to be the best of your expectations, what do you see as the role of the radiologist in the future, replaced or augmented?
I think it's where we're proposing these new models of role separation, because I think we do have to entertain the idea that in the limit of having a well-defined task and having one well-defined labels for that task, that we do end up in a setup in which we have the AI model do individually superior compared to each individual, let's say, general radiologist. And I think that's as much a question in radiology right now as it is in software engineering. OpenAI, as of yesterday, announced that they have something which is better than most programmers in the world. Does this mean that we're going to replace software engineers? I think we have to entertain that possibility.
Yep. So thank you. And then question here, shouldn't we carefully scrutinize the data before feeding it into an AI model, ensuring it aligns with the training distribution and considering factors like ethnicity and other potential biases? How do we deal with biases in these humongous models?
I feel like I have to share an anecdote here. So in 2019, I was working on the problem of identifying DVT from ultrasound scans. And we had a model that did really well. We, in fact, built it in 2 weeks. And the results were so good that we did a pre-sub inquiry to Nature. And we said, this are our results. Would you be interested? It was at a time when not that many people had shown that many things about AI doing as well as experts in medicine. And we got a positive response from Nature. They said, yeah, if you can show this, it works.
Mhm.
And so we had this, we started developing the paper, the figures. And at some point I said, hold on, let's try to understand what the model's actually doing.
Mhm.
And so we had this method for having the model output heat maps on where it was looking.
Mhm.
And so we did that. The model outputs heat maps. It's not on the clot. It's on sort of this thing in the corner where there's a bunch of text. And I was like, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Turns out there was metadata, and that metadata was dependent on the machine. And there was this one machine on which all the clots were happening, and every sort of other machine within Stanford Hospital where they weren't. It's like, oh no, that was a mistake. But it's fine, we can crop it out. And so we cropped it out, we retrained the model. It was again at 0.99 AUC. It's like wonderful. We're back on track. Let's see where it's looking now. And now we identified that the model wasn't looking at the clot, it was sort of looking around the clot.
Hmm.
We saw these like markers being placed, and I had thought they were being placed by the model, like because we had some visualization mechanism. It turns out they weren't being placed by the model. They were already there in the data. And so we went to the hospital and saw the tech acquire these images. And the tech was showing us when they acquire these images, when they see a clot, they place the calipers just right on the image. And I said, okay, what is the radiologist doing? And the tech said, radiologist isn't really doing anything. They're just checking our work and we get it right. I thought, interesting. So that was what was going on is we had a setup in which someone was marking the clots and our model wasn't a DVT detector, it was a caliper detector. And of
Yep.
course, I can detect calipers perfectly from every single scan. Now, this happened to be a form of bias in the data that we couldn't actually fix because out of all the techs there was only one tech that wasn't producing caliper outputs on the scans when they were acquiring them. And there just wasn't enough data to get that right. So the problem of getting DVT from ultrasound remained elusive, and we never got that nature submission in. But it goes to show how something as simple as looking at the data could have gotten us much further in the process early on. And so that was a lesson to me in always become one with your data before you move forward. It's hard to do at scale. It's very hard to do at scale. But I think, the people that get it right often experience the difference.
Yeah, that's a similar story looking for pneumonia on chest X-ray. And when they did the saliency map, they saw it was looking at the marker. One marker was inverted because those patients were shot posterior to anterior, ambulatory, and the other were not inverted, and they were in the bed patients, sicker. And the model learned, I'm going to say pneumonia in these sicker patients, and it was doing well for the wrong reason. And that's kind of a question here we have. How important is explainability in the general medical AI systems?
I think there is a solution to explainability, and explainability to me is a two-part solution. One is the ability of the model to explain what it says in language. That's part one. And number two is ground what it says within the image. And this is putting a marker on the image. And I think these two, to me, solve within imaging all explainability problems. I think prior to 2023, we didn't really have access to human explanations in language as a way of enforcing that explanation of the AI model, but today we do. And so I think that's really shifted.
Fantastic. Question here. Are generalist models more vulnerable to errors, adversarial attacks, etc., compared to the narrow models? And can you comment on mechanisms in place or anticipated for resiliency?
I think the evidence actually shows the opposite. The evidence shows that the resilience is actually higher with generalist models. In some ways, the same issues that we saw with narrow AI models still persist. For example, if your distribution of data set was still quite limited to one type of hospital, then we can expect generalist models to not be much better. But part of what makes them sort of more robust is because you are typically supervising on much finer grained information, and you are typically supervising on a much wider range of tasks for which you typically just have more data.
Mhm.
And so there's some sort of shared learning that goes on there that affects this resiliency or robustness. I will say this is still an early area of research. So adversarial attacks, for example, we just don't have that much literature around when it comes to medical specific generalist models.
Great. And you're getting tons of kudos here, but one question here, very interesting session. As a possible way to promote clinician comfort, collaborating with a high-performing AI model, has there been work to optimize the human-machine interfaces, as previously done with automation, robotics, and things like that, to help build trust for the clinician?
Yeah, I think there has been, and there's some very interesting literature around both the failures and the success cases. I think the problem is everything gets changed once you start to think about generalist models, where some of the things around time efficiency, for example, I think time efficiency is a great example
Mhm.
because almost every study out there that talks about this AI assistance in a narrow setting comments that it takes someone more time rather than less has sort of been a consistent finding across many studies. But I
Mhm.
expect with generalist models that just trend just reverses. And I think we'll see the same thing with perception of what is the best sort of interface in terms of whether that's text or whether that's on the image or the marker. And so I think all of that, we're essentially starting with, very little of an understanding.
Well, this has been fantastic. Again, we have tons of questions which we are not able to get to, and I really appreciate this wonderful, wonderful session. And thank you for your time and answering questions and for sharing your wonderful, wonderful work. And folks should watch you in the literature and be watching to see what you do next. So thank you, Pranav. Thank you so very much. Wonderful session.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Andrew.